I want you to think about something else that should be very important for each of your practices. How do you identify and how do you get your message out to your ideal clients, people who need you and want to use your services? One of the key things that you have to keep in mind is creating messages that people want and need to know. You know, one of the best things that I have found with attorneys who do not practice med-mal law in New York is when they talk to these people on an everyday basis and they learn that there might be something going on, one of the best things that you can do as a resource, as a go-to resource, is after talking to them and determining that they may have a viable case, you can turn to them and say, you know what, I have a book for you, a book that was written by an experienced trial attorney who will explain to you how these cases work. And by doing that, you're doing them a service. You're helping them understand how the lawsuit process works. And so I just want to briefly tell you about, and I know Tina mentioned some of my books, and I have two of them here, I'll pass them around. One of them is called Secrets of a New York Medical Malpractice Attorney, and it explains how the lawsuit process works in New York. Then another book that I have here today is called Beyond the Emergency Room Doors. The next title you'll like, it's called Doctors Gone Wild. And the last book involves wrongful death, and it's titled after the phrase, you know, in case of emergency, break glass. Well, this one is titled In Case of Death, Here's What You Need to Know. Okay? So the reason I bring this up is because I wrote these 4 consumer-oriented books to help consumers, my ideal clients, understand how these cases work. And when I talk to attorneys who don't do med-mal law, I give them an opportunity. I said, listen, if you want to look great to your clients, after you talk to them, pull out a copy of my book that I've given to you and say, here's a great book for you to read. Learn about it. It answers a lot of questions. It'll help you understand how things work. Read them yourself, give them to your clients. It's a great way for you to say, here's somebody who does this on a regular basis. Take a look at these books. It'll help you understand how the process works. And the great thing I found with these is that very few attorneys in New York do this. And there's no reason that you shouldn't be doing it. And I want you to think about how you can model that technique in your own practice. So whether you handle securities or bankruptcy or real estate, why can't you put together a booklet or a pamphlet to people who refer cases to you? So now when they get a potential client, they have that in their office to hand to their client and say, hey, I want you to go speak to this attorney. You're going to learn a lot from this. Okay? All right. So now that you've had a chance to recuperate from that horrible, horrible story, let me share with you another horrible story. A gentleman is walking down a parade here in Brooklyn, and he and his friend are horsing around. While they're horsing around, one of the guys, well-built, winds up dislocating his shoulder. And during the course of the dislocation, he realizes he can't pop his shoulder back in. So he goes to his local hospital, and when he goes to the hospital, the doctors come down to the emergency room and they make every effort to try and put the shoulder back in. For any of you who've been in a situation where you've had a dislocated joint, you're going to know that it is massively painful. And so they doped him up with some narcotic painkillers, and they had to bring in 5 people to try and manipulate putting his arm back into its socket. And they were not successful. So they called in even more people. And there are a lot of muscles, especially in a bodybuilder. A lot of muscles built up, it gets very tight. And so in order to put the joint back together again, you literally have to do unusual machinations to pull it out, apply traction, twist it, put it back in, and pop it into the socket. And this went on. And finally, they were able to successfully do it. It took a while, but now after the procedure, his arm swelled up like a balloon. And they said, you know what, let's hold you overnight. Let's observe you just to make sure everything's fine. And that's what they did. It was a good choice to do it. But during the night, they had on the B team. And unfortunately for this man, the B team didn't recognize that he was having neurological symptoms in his hand. The blood flow to his fingers was diminished. He was getting tingling. He was having difficulty moving, and he told the nurses. And the nurses blew it off, said, don't worry, you'll be fine. It wasn't until the morning when the next shift came in and recognized that this is a real red flag. It's a real problem. And the problem is that it's an indication that there's a lack of blood flow. So what did they do? At that point, they went ahead and got a CAT scan. The problem at that point was that the CAT scan was being read by one of the doctors on the B team from the overnight shift. And he didn't recognize what was there that should have been seen. So now, a little bit later on in the morning, the senior attendings come in. They're reviewing all the stuff done by the junior team from the night before. And they come to the realization that there's some problem here. There is pressure building up against the nerve that controls what's called the brachial plexus. And as a result, this man now is having problems with his hand. What do? They make a decision. They have to get this guy into surgery immediately. They have to decompress all the fluid that's building up under his armpit from here all the way down to his chest. And when they do that, there's a lot of fluid that was built up causing pressure. Unfortunately for this man, that pressure was so significant that it cut off the blood supply to the nerve, and they were never able to get it back.